So I gave you all the conceptual and thought process and all that stuff, and so now how do I apply that, right? And so what better way to do this than the 3-page story that we've been talking about all weekend. Carlos, Ryan, and Wills have done their interpretations of the script, and so we'll start with a little bit of the thought process and then move on to the actual practical way I do the stuff. And so we have the 3 pages here. If we go back to what I was thinking, I'm reading the script. It's obviously some kind of technical bunker, facility, and so I'm going to go with drab colors for that, right? It's just an underground facility. We're going to go with a warm gray. So I'm taking a gray, I'm adding a little bit of yellow to it, and I'm using a warm gray because these characters have very bright, saturated, mostly cool colors. All right, Spider-Man has red in it, but he also has blue. Okay, and I'm kind of going through that same exercise in my head of the color movement through the page to help accentuate the storytelling in the page. Okay, and adding the values now, right? So as I'm talking about value, the stuff that I want to push forward, and then the stuff that I want to push back with highlights. Okay, and so this is kind of, again, all the stuff that's going on in my head, and then to bring it all together, we're washing it with a little bit of that same warm gray, so that everything looks drab, right? So even if I'm green colored, if I'm in a drab environment, I want to be a little bit drab too, so that it all kind of ties everything together. So that's kind of the thought process through the 3 story pages that we're talking about. All right. How do I set up a page? All right. So this is the scan of Wills' page. It's a grayscale file. I think typically I get either anywhere from a 450 to 600 DPI scan, and I color, and it's at artboard size. And so Wills' artboard is actually a double artboard. So a double artboard at 600 DPI file is going to be a huge file. So I would actually size that down to 450, right? Marvel and DC print at actual comic book size and 600 DPI. So if you can have your file anywhere near that range, you won't have a problem, right? So comic book size at 600 DPI equals 11 by 17 at 450. And so that's kind of where I stay. If it's a cover or a pinup and it's something that I think is going to be used as a poster down the line, I'll go ahead and color it at 11 by 17 at 600 so that the integrity of the file kind of stays as high quality as possible, because it's going to be used for something that's even bigger, right? So every now and then an iconic piece comes in, and I definitely either scan it even at 800 sometimes and color it at that size, and that's just because I know down the line they're going to ask for a big file, and that way I don't have to recolor it. I just give them the original file. The way I work, this is the work that the way we kind of developed ages ago at Wildstorm. It's the way that we had to work this way because Photoshop back then did not have layers, and so we all had to color on one layer. Right, so nowadays, one of the questions I get asked is how many layers do you use to color a file? And to be honest, I actually really color on one layer, and then I add layers for special effects and all that stuff on the back end. A lot of the files I've been showing you today are multiple layer files, and that's because I'm showing you mental steps. They're mental steps that I perform in my head and not physically, and so that the best way to illustrate that is through layers. But I think about 90% of the pages that I color, one layer. I just keep it all there, and it's because that's how I was trained, right? I was trained to paint traditionally. Doesn't mean that you should. You want to be careful in creating multiple layers. So some people will have a layer for the background, a layer for Hulk, a layer for Spider-Man on panel 1, then a layer for the background, a layer for Spider-Man, a layer for the foreground in panel 2, etc., etc., etc. At some point, your file, at 600 DPI by 17 has 30 layers, and your machine's going to start, 1, crawling, and 2, you can lose track of all those layers, and you can end up rendering on the wrong layer by accident, and then you forget that was the layer that you messed up on, and you can't find it later on. And so the less layers you use, the easier it is to keep track of the file, right? The way that I work is I will actually create a duplicate of the inks on the channels here, okay? I call it line art, and we have do we have a file for this on Discord? Okay, and so we have a step-by-step of how I break this down into a working file on Discord too. Okay, I call it line art, and then what I'll do is I'll actually delete the inks off of the main channels, so that by clicking on the eyeball here, I can see the inks, but I can't edit them or accidentally paint over them, right? At the very heart of it, I don't want to mess with the inks unless it's going to be for a special effect or a glow or something like that. And so I will work with a floating channel, as it's called. So if you click on the layer, you'll see it highlighted in gray. That means that it's activated. And so what I'll activate the layer, the channels, and not the line art. I just have the eyeball on it, so I can only see it, not edit it. Okay. I'll convert the file to RGB, and I work in RGB. I don't work in CMYK. RGB gives you a wider range of colors. It also activates screen mode and color dodge mode for rendering, which is a great tool for painting down from a dark color. And it allows you to use filters if you want to use some of these filters. Okay. The one thing I also do is over here under View, I click on Proof Colors, and what that does, it's actually translating the RGB colors that I'm laying down into CMYK on the fly. And so even though I'm working in RGB, I'm seeing the colors in the CMYK spectrum. And so there's going to be colors that when I render are going to be out of gamut or non-printable. And in RGB, they're bright and garish, but in CMYK, they're a lot more muted. Okay, that function there under View will translate that for you. And so you'll be seeing it the way it's going to print. All right, so I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So let's say I have this here, and I'll turn it off so you can see what I'm talking about. So that color right there is out of gamut, meaning that it won't print this way. But if I turn on Proof Colors, it's going to show me how it's going to print. And so I can definitely render in that and use it, knowing that once I convert it to CMYK and trap it, it will print like this. Even though it really is looking like this because I'm in the RGB spectrum. All right, if you work in CMYK and you're happy working in CMYK, that's okay too, right? It's the equivalent of me saying, I use Prismacolors, you use Derwent, we both color with pencils. That's just the way we each do our thing. And then we do have the calibration for the monitors on Discord too, like some of the settings. The easiest way to calibrate your monitor without buying an expensive spectrometer is to print it. First of all, take your file and convert it to CMYK, okay, and then back to RGB, and then print it, right? And then compare it to your monitor. If your print is super dark, you're going to decrease the brightness on your monitor to match, and then try it again. And you'll see that what you're trying to do, most of the times what people do is their monitors are so bright that everything prints super dark. And the fix is simply that, right? You can increase your contrast a little bit and knock your brightness down. And that should get you there. If you're printing really muddy, it means that you're printing out of gamut colors, and that's why you convert it to CMYK first and then back to RGB. And that's so that all these non-printable colors get converted, and when you come back to RGB, they're already converted to printable. One of the ways you do it is by knowing what your color is made up of, right? So if I'm gonna make a medium blue, I'm gonna have at least 90% cyan and about 50% magenta in it, right? So that as I'm coloring and I'm looking for this color, you have a window here, the info palette. You see this palette right here? All right, it's gonna give me the CMYK values for the colors that I'm looking at in real time, right? And so as I'm clicking on it here, it's giving me that 77 cyan, 3 magenta, right? So I know that that's not a medium blue. That's how I knew that monitor sucked, is that as I put my cursor over the color, it was reading as a medium blue, but it was showing as a cyan like this, and it would look garish, but I'm like, dude, I'm looking at the numbers here. I know that this is the color that I want, right? And so that's one of the ways you can do it, right? By knowing what a color should look like. So like a darker blue. And so if I'm trying to hit a medium blue on this box and reading it and seeing that it's cyan, then I need to add red to my blue, right? And so then I mix the correct blue, and I can now, in normal mode, add that blue to get to what I need, so that as I read it, now it's giving me that 80-38, right? And so now I know that's the blue that I want. So it's coloring by the numbers, and that's one of the things that we were doing. We had a John Nee, who used to run the Wildstorm, and was also, who taught me so much about printed color. We made a bet about, hey, do you think you can color a piece if the monitor is black and white, but you're coloring in color? And I was like, sure, you just have to read the info palette. I don't think we ever did it though, but I was like, yeah, I can totally do it, because you know, if I'm clicking the color that I want and I'm mixing it the way I'm used to mixing it, I know I can get to the end, right? That's actually would be fun to do. Anyway, yeah, yeah, the grayscale, the black and white challenge. Yeah, he was like, "What do you think?" I'm like, "We could totally do it." I mean, I was 25, so I was like, I could do whatever the hell I wanted. I thought I did. But that's, you know, that's a workaround, right? If you know what a true red is mixed with, then if you can't really see it, as long as you're mixing it the right color, you should be able to color correctly. Brings us to palettes. If you look at what I have here, this sync-based palette that I have here, this is what I open up for every book that I work on. These are the colors that I sample with the most. It's basically the Photoshop palette that goes down to here. And then I just added rows of cyans, purples, magentas, greens, and there's a few rows of flesh tones. So I like to vary the flesh tones in the characters in every scene. And then I also create palettes that are very specific to characters. So if I'm working on the Darth Vader book, I create a Darth Vader palette, and it gives me all of Darth Vader's colors are right here. So, you know, his helmet and shiny stuff, this is the cloth black, the color of the eyes glass, and then this is the colors of the lights and the chest monitor that he wears. And then there's colors for, you know, Imperial officers, Imperial ships, and then a lot of the characters that I was working on in that specific storyline. And that, the reason I do that is because I always start with the exact same color of flesh and blue and red and yellow for Superman. I'll wash it before I start rendering, but I always start with the exact same color, right? That gives me the consistency in the storytelling that I want. And again, that's the way I work. I know other colorists that have color palettes that are, you see them like scrolling for like 4 swipes to get to that yellow that they're using for whatever. And for me, it's more about efficiency. So much so that you can see that most of my palette is even closed. I only scroll down if I'm using that specific book. Okay. For brushes, I have a ton of brushes, but I don't use all of them. Like the top ones I use are sitting right here from 1 to 23. And then I have some watercolor ones at the very bottom, and I put them at the very bottom because it's very easy for me to go to the top, to the bottom, select the one that I want, and then go from there. And then in between I have some texture stuff that I use, like clouds and fire and smoke and all kinds of stuff, which we'll go through as I show you how to render. Okay?